Shalom Aleichem, sweetest friends. So today we are going to be continuing our series of Sefer Mitzvot ha-Katzar, the Concise Book of Mitzvot, by the Chofetz Chaim, Yisroel Meir Kagan. And just in case you haven't seen it before, this is the book. I know it's backwards, or actually I think it might be right side up. There are other pocket editions of this book as well. But anyway, so this mitzvah today, this is a negative prohibition, this negative mitzvah is very, very short, and it's actually a continuation of previous mitzvahs, speaking of idolatry and not to involve oneself with idolatry in any way. So it's kind of a continuation. It's a very, very short mitzvah. However, it has a lot of implications in both our culture and in Messianic Jewish circles as well. And I'll talk about those implications in just a moment. It says, mitzvahs lo saseh, shelo chatein im akum. So it's a negative commandment not to intermarry with an idolater. Now, I'll read you here how it says it, how it translates it into the English in this edition of the English translation of the Sefer Mitzvot. It says, it is a negative commandment not to intermarry with a non-Jewish person. And so we'll talk about that. We'll explore that in just a moment. Continuing on, it says, Shenemar, as it says in Devarim, Zayin Gimel, as it says in Deuteronomy 7:3, Tizchatein bam, to intermarry with them. And this is applicable in every place and every time for male and female. Now, let's first go to the actual verses here. So in chapter 7, verse in Deuteronomy, we'll just go from verse 1. It says, when the Lord your God shall bring you into the land that you are go to possess it, and you shall cast out many nations before you. And it mentions the 7 Canaanite nations there. 7 nations mightier and greater than you are, and when the Lord your God shall deliver them up before you, and you shall smite them, then you shall utterly destroy them. You shall not make a covenant with them, nor show mercy unto them. And then it goes into our verse. V'lo tischatein, and you shall not make marriages with them. Bitcha lo sitein livno, uvito lo sikach livnecha. So those verses actually are very important, and a careful reading for our purposes today is something that is important. Now, this brings up basically 2 different issues. So the first issue is that of intermarriage between a Jew and a non-Jew, and the second application of that is also who is considered a Jew. So first off, let's tackle them one by one. And these are much larger subjects than I'll devote time here in this short class, in this short lesson. So it's tzarich iyun, as they say. It requires further study. However, we'll just kind of take a broad generalization, a flyover of these topics. So the first thing is, literally what the Chofetz Chaim says and what the passage is talking about is not to enter into a covenant with idolaters. And so I'll just read the Lashon of the language of the Chofetz Chaim. Mitzvos lo saseh shelo lischatein im akum. So it says you're not allowed to intermarry with akum. And akum is an acronym for idolaters, of the kuchalim mazalos, the worshippers of stars and constellations. Now, so that obviously in the halachic literature is known as a person not intermarrying, a Jew not intermarrying with a non-Jew. Now, why is that? Because according to halacha, there really isn't a category for the Messianic Gentile. A Gentile who is not a Jew, who is not an idolater, but is fully part of the covenants of God and the Jewish people, as it says in the book of Ephesians and other places in the writing, the letters, different letters of Paul and the writings of the apostles. And so the part of the issue is and when it comes to intermarriage, obviously a Jewish person is not allowed to marry a non-Jewish person if that non-Jewish person is an idolater. So for instance, if they are part of a different religion, such as Buddhism or Mormonism or Hinduism or of no religion. And so that's part of the issue in terms of the baseline halachic issue. Now, how does that play into Messianic circles? Well, I would argue that it is not a sin for a non-Jewish person and a Jewish person that are both followers of the Messiah to intermarry. However, I did say the word intermarry because at the same time, culturally and according to their heritage, they are intermarried. Now that brings up another topic of who is a Jew, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But the interesting application of this is in the second letter to the Corinthians, where Paul is talking about basically receiving the grace of God, etc., and how the people are all holy, and he's calling also from fleeing from idolatry. Now, keep in mind, this letter is originally the address of this letter, and all of the letters in the writings of the apostles, they have addresses. So they're writing to actual people. Now, they're not writing to us. They're writing to people that are flesh and blood people living in a particular address at that time. However, we apply it to ourselves, obviously, seeing the divine origin and the divine applicability of these letters to us in modern day. Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness? Or what fellowship has light with darkness? What accord has the Messiah, the King of Israel, with Belial, I think is how you say it in English? Or what portion does a believer share with an unbeliever? What agreement has the temple of God with idols? For we are the temple of the living God, as God said, and he goes on to quote some verses, etc. Now, obviously, we see this famous passage of not being unequally yoked. Okay, so I'll take Eleanor's question in just a moment. So let me just lay out the foundation here. So obviously, he's talking to Gentile former idolaters and who are wanting to, or in relationships or marrying Gentile idolaters. Now, can we apply this passage to Jews and non-Jews? I would say there is a little bit of debate whether a Jewish believer, just to use the term there, can marry a Jewish non-believer. So that would be a little bit of a debate whether they're doing something immoral there or they're sinning. However, I think that practically speaking, that doesn't work, because essentially what you have is somebody who recognizes Yeshua as the Jewish king, as the Messiah, and somebody who does not recognize Yeshua as the Jewish king, the Messiah. And so this would be akin to somebody who, in the days of King David's kingship being contested, somebody who does believe, who is in the camp that believes in King David, that David should be the king, and somebody who believes that his stepbrother Adoniyahu, for instance, Adonijah, I think is how you say it in English, should be the king. And how could you have people that have different allegiances get married together when fundamentally they're on a different page for the future of Israel, etc.? Now, much more could be said about that, and I'll take Eleanor's question. But what about Torah and Mitzvot? Are you assuming Jewish believers have no obligation, neither do Gentile believers? Now, so when it comes to obligations in terms of Torah and Mitzvot, it's very clear that Jews have obligations and that Gentiles also have obligations. The way I like to say it is the Torah applies to everybody. However, it doesn't apply to everybody equally. So, for instance, the Torah applies to people that are of the line of Aaron, a Cohen, somebody whose last name is Cohen or Khan or Katz or etc., very differently than it does to me. For instance, that person, that a person with the last name of Cohen who's a man cannot marry a convert or cannot marry a Gentile. That is something I think that would have some immorality aspects there, because finally when the temple is restored and the priesthood is restored under the rule of King Messiah, then that would be an issue that Cohen would disqualify himself. So that might have some applications of intermarriage with a person who's a Cohen. And likewise, also somebody who, Okay, so non-Jews also have obligations to Torah, and she was mentioning Acts 15, and they do mention those are the 4 prohibitions that they mentioned that are also found in Leviticus 17. So not all Messianic Gentiles have the obligation to Torah on the same level that Jews do. And so that's simply what I was meaning, in the sense that in the same way that an average Israelite is not obligated to Torah in the same level that a priest is, so Messianic Gentiles who are brought into the Commonwealth of Israel are not obligated to the Torah Mitzvot the same way that Jews are. And so in the same way, Messianic Gentiles have a whole range of freedom to be able to do things that are outside, that are not immoral, that are not incumbent upon all sons of Noah, and also that are not specifically enjoined upon Messianic Gentiles by the apostles, which seems like a higher status of just the regular Torah commandments of the sons of Noah. But if you think about this, essentially when a Gentile is following the Jewish king, following Christ, if you want to put it in those terms, they are in a sense attaching themselves to the Jewish people, attaching themselves to Judaism. So even though the religion might look like that they're a Pentecostal or a Protestant or a Roman Catholic or Greek Orthodox or whatever it is, the traditions of those, essentially those come from Judaism. And so in a sense, they are practicing Judaism, although they may not be practicing and they may not know it, but they're attached to the Jewish people. And so they're attached to the Torah. So there are Torah commandments that of course apply to all people who name the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, those things are like not lying and not stealing, and very basic commandments of morality. When it comes to ritual aspects of commandments, etc., it seems that Gentiles or a Messianic Gentile would not be obliged to those particular commandments. Now, it's a larger subject. Eleanor is making some comments, and I'm more than happy to go to comment back and forth in the comments here on this video, and it's a large subject. Now, getting back to the second application of this mitzvah for today is the question of who is a Jew. Now, this is a hotly contested subject, and it's one that probably most or many of the people viewing this video would not agree with me on. Now, halachically, according to classical Jewish law, for thousands of years, or for hundreds of years, if you want to say, ever since the Jewish law was codified in the 1500s, so at least as far back as over 5 centuries, the Judaism has viewed someone who is Jewish as the mother of somebody who's Jewish, who is the daughter of somebody who's Jewish, etc., etc. So you're Jewish if your mom is Jewish, who is Jewish by her mother, etc., etc. So that classically for centuries and centuries, although it might be argued by other people, is at least today how Judaism sees somebody who's Jewish. Now, the Talmud, way before, centuries and centuries before the codification of Jewish law, uses 2 passages to prove that. First passage that they use is the book of Ezra at the end, where it talks about, it implores the Jewish men, the Israelites who are returning back to the second temple, when the temple is being rebuilt, to put away their wives who are not Jewish, their non-Jewish wives. And so it sees from that okay, well, that those families are illicit relations, and one can argue, okay, that wouldn't apply necessarily to a Jew and a non-Jew who are both Messianic, a Gentile Messianic person and a Jewish Messianic person, because those wives were ostensibly idolaters and they were in idolatrous relationships. However, going back to the subject of who is a Jew, the second passage that the Talmud uses is in our verse, the verses here in Deuteronomy 7. And I'm just going to read to you from Chabad.org. Nevertheless, matrilineal descent can be deduced from a passage in Deuteronomy. There, the generation that is about to enter the land of Canaan is told, you shall not intermarry with them, you shall not give your daughter to his son, and you shall not take his daughter for your son. For he will turn away your son from following me, and they will worship the gods of others, and the wrath of God will be kindled against you, and he will quickly destroy you. Chapter 7 of Deuteronomy, verses 3 and 4. Read those verses carefully, says the author of this piece. God is warning the people not to intermarry with the people of the land they're about to enter. Neither their sons nor their daughters should intermarry. What would you expect next? For he will turn your daughter away from me, or she will turn your son away from me. But that's not what he says, meaning God. He will turn your son from following me. Who is that son? Who is the he that is turning that son away? There are only two possible interpretations, and both lead us to the same conclusion, it says. One possibility is that it is speaking of the son of your daughter. So you have a daughter, let's call her Grace, and she marries a nice Hindu boy. Let's call him Gupta. And Grace and Gupta married together, and so he obviously is going to lead her astray. But that's the one possibility, is that the son of your daughter, now meaning the grandson of this illicit relationship. Since grandsons are often called sons in the Hebrew Bible, Grace and Gupta now are going to have a son. We'll call him George, just to keep the alliteration here. She is the one mentioned first in the verse, who was taken by a non-Jewish man, in our example Gupta. That is the he that is turning the grandson away. But that grandson is still considered your son. That being so, we see that the child of a Jewish woman, even when the father is not Jewish, is still considered Jewish, meaning your son. And there's a footnote here. Let's see. This is the interpretation of Rashi of the Talmud, the section of the Talmud that we'll see is in, let's see here. And let's see, it looks like Kiddushin, page 68, side B, and Yavamot, page 23, side A. Now, going back to the section here, and I will definitely go ahead and post this in the comments here so you can read and follow the author's argumentation here. So, continuing on, it says, sorry, just going back up to that section. The other possibility is that this is speaking of your son, the one who took a non-Jewish woman, that he that is turning him away is his non-Jewish father-in-law. By marrying out of the Jewish people, your son has been turned away from God because his children will not be Jewish. Either way leads to the same conclusion. This indeed is the ingenious proof text of the Talmud in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, when it states that the child of a Jewish mother and a non-Jewish father is considered Jewish. There is no descendant opinion. And a case is mentioned in the Jerusalem Talmud in Kiddushin chapter 3, verse 12, or Halacha 12, where an individual named Yaakov from the town of Gevurah considered performing a circumcision on a child of a non-Jewish woman whose father was Jewish. He was severely punished and his opinion rejected outright. It seems that this individual was known for his foolish ideas, and then it gives a source there as well, in which the same individual claimed that fish required ritual slaughtering, etc., etc. So, to anyone who has studied the Talmud, that itself is a stunning fact. The Talmud is replete with contending opinions over almost everything. So he's saying there is no descendant opinion of this opinion in the Talmud. The fact that on the issue of matrilineal lineage, there is one opinion universally accepted, and is nothing less than astonishing, unless you accept that this has always had been the understanding of all Jews. Now, what are we to do with our state now? Well, first of all, we're in a state of exile. And so would I say that somebody who is Jewish only on their father's side is not Jewish? Well, I'm sorry if this sounds harsh, but for classical Jewish opinion that's been held for hundreds and hundreds of years, perhaps centuries, perhaps millennia, that this has been the opinion all throughout streaming through Judaism. However, is that person not Jewish? Of course they're Jewish. If you want to look at Judaism in a larger definition today as somebody who is socially Jewish and Jewish in every single way, even religiously Jewish, but for matters of technical Jewish law, would need some kind of procedure to be considered a technically legal Jewish person. So this can be compared to somebody who is an American citizen, speaking of, obviously somebody here in the United States, an American citizen who marries somebody who's a foreign national, and then they have a child. Well, is that child an American citizen? Well, yes. However, at the same time, if that was done in another country or something of that nature, I don't know exactly the laws of how that works, but that child might need to become American citizen or something of that nature. But that would be kind of a somewhat analogous situation, although I don't know American law so well, but just to give you that kind of analogy. So this, again, is there's a lot of people that have dissenting opinions from what I'm saying and might bring other proofs, and you're welcome in the comments to kind of dialogue with us together. And again, I don't say this to condemn anybody. And again, I don't think that in the context of Messianic faith, which I believe is Judaism, basically that a non-Jewish person and a Jewish person who get married, who are both followers of the Jewish king, both followers of Messiah, are sinning or in any way immoral. However, the one thing to consider is that when people get married together, intermarriage, if you will, with Jews and non-Jews, it sets a precedent. It sets a precedent for their family lineage if there's no conversion that's happening. And it seems to me that this is something that maybe 3-4 generations down the road, the Judaism in the person's family might be lost as the assimilating factor to assimilate into within Christianity, which is often the case. A Christian and a Jew, Messianic Jew, get married. A lot of times this is how this works. A lot of times the Jewishness is not preserved. Now this has been changing in the Messianic movement with Jew and Gentile intermarriage. But anyways, it's a large subject, and I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of a primer on this. But we spent a lot of time, and much more time should be dedicated to this, and a discussion with all different viewpoints is welcome as well. So that is the halacha for today. And again, if you want to make some comments in the commentary, in the comments section over there or down below, wherever it is that you're viewing this on whatever device, you're more than welcome to, and I can dialogue as much as I can with you. And I'm not a rabbi, but I can give my opinion, etc. And again, there's all kinds of social issues and emotions that this flares up, and so I don't mean to address all those things. And those things I don't know are necessarily social media is the right forum for all of those kinds of questions. And your local competent Messianic leader should be consulted, which might have dissenting opinions from what I'm saying here. And again, I'm not saying that I'm the final word or anything, as I'm not a rabbi, but I'm just kind of sharing the things that seem correct to me and what I've studied and what's been taught to me in the past as well. So anyways, have a great day in every way. God bless. Until tomorrow, when we continue through the next mitzvah, having to do, it's a negative commandment to have no mercy on idol worshippers. And how does that work with having mercy with people who, with Yeshua statements, loving your enemies, etc. So we'll try and tackle with God's help that tomorrow. Have a great day in every way. God bless.